This may be the central question in the Sean P. Diddy Combs criminal case. How is it that Casandra Ventura Fine, the star witness, alleged victim number one, whose testimony may make or break the government's case, how is it she can claim she's a survivor of Sean Combs' alleged sex trafficking when there is arguably evidence establishing she set up these sexual encounters, encouraged them, didn't leave Combs, and even was intimate with him after he allegedly raped her? Well, it may all come down to understanding trauma, coping, and important psychological considerations. And that is why we are bringing in now a mental health expert to understand these factors and what the jury may decide. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law&Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. You see, Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. So one of the biggest questions to come out of the testimony of Casandra Ventura, now Casandra Ventura Fine, arguably the government's star witness in its criminal racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution case against Sean Diddy Combs, is how can she say she's a victim if she spent so much time with Combs? How can she claim she was a victim of sex trafficking and was coerced into elaborate sexual performances with sex workers if she allegedly helped set them up? You have to imagine the prosecution knew that all of these past messages she had with Combs and her seemingly staying with him for 11 years would be a big focus of her cross-examination by Combs' defense counsel, and it certainly was. The cross-examination, the questioning by the defense counsel took 2 days, and Combs' attorney, Anna Estevao, confronted Ventura Fine with all of this evidence to suggest that everything was consensual, that she was a willing participant, which could be a defense to the charges that he's facing. Messages where she wrote him, "I love you so much." Going to an FO on Tuesday, FO meaning freak off. Good morning to my king, you mean everything. There's a conversation where it appears Combs is saying how his favorite times are when they FOD, so maybe freak offed, and then made love after, to which Ventura responds, "Yeah, I like those times." Combs writes, "Anything you need me to get or set up in case we want to FO?" Ventura responds, "Oh, hit whoever would turn you on to see me with." Then there was this message, "Wish we could have FO'd before you left. My period is over." There's another message where she apparently claims that she's always ready for a freak off and that she didn't want to freak off for the last time. Quote, "I want it to be the first time for the rest of our lives." There are a lot of sexually explicit messages between the two. There's a lot of loving messages between the two. And yes, they were in a relationship for quite some time. That's definitely a factor. But in a case where the jury is being asked to believe that she was a victim of violent, coerced sexual episodes with sex workers, this complicates things. Now, it doesn't torpedo the prosecution's case. No, not at all. But it is an important consideration. So putting aside, of course, the argument that in this case and other sexual abuse cases, a victim could say yes 99 times, but if they say no one time, that's still rape, that's still sexual assault, or what have you. But the prosecution could make the argument that if the jury accepts the allegations as true, for instance, in the March 2016 LA Intercontinental incident, video evidence appearing to show Combs beating and dragging Ventura at a time when a freak-off was underway, that's an example of a non-consensual sexual encounter amounting to sex trafficking. And remember, for sex trafficking, we're talking about using force, fraud, or coercion to induce somebody to engage in a commercial sex act. And there are elements of transportation as well. And we know that these alleged coerced freak-offs occurred in all different cities and locations, and escorts were flown in too. So you can understand why the prosecution has been moving forward with this charge. Or what about the allegation that Combs allegedly showed Ventura Fine videos of freak-offs on a plane as a way to allegedly intimidate and blackmail her, and when they landed in New York, he wanted to have a freak-off, so they did. She claimed that she felt trapped. I've made the argument before that seems to be one of the more concrete examples of alleged sex trafficking that the prosecution may really focus on. But there was evidence that she didn't always agree. For instance, there was an exchange between the two where she seemingly tried to bring up her concerns with freak-offs, and Combs responded basically guessing that she didn't want to have them and even called her predictable. She asked him to delete videos of freak-offs off of his devices. But you have to wonder, after I said all this, you have to wonder, after so many years together, after admitting that she took a proactive role in setting these experiences up, After admitting on the stand that she first agreed to them as a way to make him happy, even after communicating after the 2016 incident and after she claims Combs raped her, not only did they communicate, not only does she admit that she had sex with Combs consensually one more time, again, after the attack, after the alleged rape. I mean, she said on the stand she doesn't hate him. So with all of that, will the jury have a tough time accepting that Combs sex trafficked Casandra Ventura Fine, which is imperative not only for that specific charge, but also the racketeering charge, criminal enterprise, criminal activity, underlying crimes, all that. And we know the defense also pointed to issues of jealousy and whether Ventura Fine had a financial incentive to accuse Combs. Remember, she sued him and settled. She also testified that she's expecting a $10 million settlement from the LA Intercontinental Hotel. Actually, she also testified while crying that when talking about the purported $20 million settlement with Combs, quote, "I'd give that money back if I never had to do freak-offs. I would have agency and autonomy. I wouldn't have had to work so hard to get it back." This is a gray area. This is confusing. But it seems to me the prosecution is going to have to explain that there are psychological reasons why an alleged victim like Ventura Fine would act in this way. In fact, we anticipate the testimony of psychologist Dr. Dawn Hughes, who testified in the Johnny Depp trial, maybe testifying about coping strategies. So was Casandra Ventura a willing participant or victim? I feel that this is all going to come down to very, very important psychological evidence. So for that, let me bring in right now forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober. Doctor, so good to have you. Thanks so much for coming back here on Sidebar.
Great to be here.
So Dr. Bober, how is it possible that she could be in this relationship, not leave, set up freak-offs, be a part of freak-offs, and still be a legitimate victim of sex trafficking? What are the psychological issues at play?
So I think the defense has a lot of ammunition here, as you said, but compliance does not equal consent. And remember, there was a tremendous power imbalance here. Cassie Ventura clearly has a history of trauma, probably poor self-esteem, poor boundaries. And a lot of this is a trauma response. We see this in people who are taken hostage or people who are in cults where they become so beaten down that they almost develop what we call an emotional dependence on the person that they're with, this term trauma bonding, which is thrown around a lot. So I think it is possible to appear that they are a willing participant, but still be so beaten down and so defeated that they are going along with this because they fear abandonment. They fear that they will be out on the street and they're financially dependent on the person they're with, and the person could ruin their reputation. So it may seem on the surface that they're a willing participant, but they still could be under the psychological control of that individual.
Now, she was young when she started her relationship with Sean Combs. I believe there's a 17-year age difference. She wasn't a minor, she was an adult, but does that age discrepancy play a factor?
Well, that also plays into the power imbalance. But think about how many people we know in our lives that we see are in terribly abusive relationships. And we say to ourselves, why does this person stay? They could walk away anytime they want. But now talk about someone who's with P. Diddy, right? A powerful person with tremendous influence, with tremendous financial resources. You have to believe that if you walk away from someone like him, you're going to pay for it, and you're going to pay for it in the worst way.
Do you get that from the messages that I was reading, where you have this love between them? Because, the counter argument could be there were good times, there were bad times. But this wasn't like, they were fighting. The good times were they were together and intimate. The bad times were, according to the prosecution, she was illegally trafficked. She was a victim of violent sexual abuse and physical abuse. I mean, the allegations, what she described happened to her in these sexual episodes, are quite disturbing. So how is the jury going to reconcile those messages, which, as I said, the prosecution knew about, anticipated? How do we make sense of that? Is that a situation where an alleged victim says, I'm not accepting that I'm a victim. I'm not accepting that I was traumatized. They don't appreciate what happened to them?
So one person could look at it and say there's good times and there's bad times, and another person could look at it and say this woman did whatever she needed to do to survive, right? She knew that she had to go along with this. Maybe those times that seemed loving over text, maybe she was just saying that. Maybe she didn't really mean it. That's an alternative theory too. There's this concept of cognitive dissonance, right? Where we have conflicting feelings, values, and emotions. We know that someone has hurt us, but then we say, but he must really love me. So it's things that we go through in our minds, normalization and rationalization, so that we can make it through our everyday lives and be in situations which may be highly traumatic, but we have to survive. And so this is the mind's way of protecting itself in that situation.
Are these coping strategies? Is this what, when we're talking about what Dr. Dawn Hughes may testify, are these coping strategies?
Yes, it is. And I think it's really going to come down to the psychological testimony. And there is this concept of delayed recognition, right? Also a survival mechanism where people don't necessarily recognize at the time that what's happening to them is a traumatic event. So there's that as well.
Now, the reason I'm putting forward these questions is not as if I'm saying I don't believe Casandra Ventura fine, but I am posing the questions that if you read social media and you read YouTube comments, there are people who don't believe her. And so she might not be telling the truth. He's innocent until proven guilty. Or we're anticipating what the prosecution is going to have to argue to the jury to make sense of a lot of what they heard during cross-examination. So I just want to make that caveat. And I say that because now I have to ask this question. She claims she was raped. And then she says at a later time, she had consensual sex with Sean Combs. How is it possible that someone could be raped by an attacker and then have consensual sex with them at a later time? Again, assuming these allegations are true.
Well, I mean, I think it's very possible, right? I mean, no means no, right? Compliance does not equal consent. If someone goes along with it, and we see this a lot in people who are traumatized, right? There's this phenomenon called fawning. Fawning means being a people pleaser, basically going along with the situation that you're in because you don't want to be hurt. You don't want to offer resistance because something might happen to you. So it's possible that at times it was consensual, that she went along with it. And it's possible at times that it was forcible and it was a crime. Those things don't necessarily have to be consistent one way or the other. But I think as I said, the defense, I think, has a lot of ammunition here because a lot of people who don't really understand the psychology of trauma are going to look at this and they're going to say, again, she could have walked away anytime she wanted. They're going to say she stayed because of the money, the power, the influence, the lifestyle. I definitely think they have a lot to work with that the prosecution is going to have to contend with.
Yeah, I think a big issue here is fear, or the alleged fear, right? That she couldn't speak up or leave because of Combs' power, his wealth, resources, his violence. This is what I think the prosecution is going to focus on. I mean, the prosecution could argue, hey, you know why she didn't fight back more? The 2016 tape, Exhibit A. Because if she did, look what could have happened. I mean, that tape,
right,
arguably the worst piece of evidence for him. But you wonder if some jurors will say, I don't know, I still don't see it. Again, I think that concept of fear is very important to crystallize for the jury.
I agree. And when you're dealing with, again, we've seen this time and time again, a powerful celebrity who's on trial, quite frankly, there are people in that jury pool or in that jury who are fans of this person, and they don't want to believe that this person is capable of this. But remember, Diddy was denying all of this until that video came out. And as soon as he, kicked into what I call impression management mode, all of a sudden he was apologetic. But that apology came way too late. It happened after multiple denials, and it only surfaced once there was video evidence that this occurred.
By the way, when you look at that video and there's a point where she doesn't move, she doesn't fight back, she doesn't run away, do you think that adds to what you're saying?
I do. I think that supports it. But it's going to be very difficult because, again, when you see a video like that, and then when you see these loving texts back and forth that are so tender, people are going to be saying, I'm just so confused. If he was such a horrible person, why didn't she just leave? Why didn't she just walk away? But again, this is something that plays out every day in abusive relationships in this country. And these are very well-known psychological phenomena in the literature.
That's why it is also from a legal point of view, it's important to get the corroborating testimony of other alleged victims and witnesses, like Dawn Richard, former member of Danity Kane at the time of this recording. She is about to take the stand again, we believe. She testified she witnessed Cassie's abuse, didn't do anything because she was scared. Now, I want to ask you about this as well. I want to ask you about these messages, okay? One thing to talk about the messages during the course of the relationship. I want to talk about the later messages. So in 2019, again, after all of the alleged sex trafficking, coerced freak-offs, the violence, the alleged rape, the 2016 hotel incident, Combs writes Ventura, sending you love, and this is in regards to her becoming pregnant. She's now married, so Alex fine, by the way. Congratulations, Cass. I truly am happy for you. You're going to make a beautiful mother. God bless. Ventura Fine responds, thank you. God bless. 2020. Combs texted Cassie, miss my best friend. Hope you're well. Ventura responded that she hoped he was taking care of himself, hoped his family was well. Combs responds, thank you so much for responding. It really means a lot more than you know. Sending you nothing but love and light always. Please know I'm always here if you need me. And he also wrote to her, you were there for me through everything, called her the greatest woman in the world and my ride or die always. Ventura responds, I wouldn't have been at this beautiful point in my life without having been with you. The things you said blew my mind a little bit. Dr. Bober, this is now later in time. This is 3-4 years before she filed her lawsuit. Is this understandable? Could she still be a victim?
Well, I don't think it's black and white, right? I mean, there may have been some aspects of the relationship that she really missed. And this goes back to the concept of delayed recognition. Maybe at the time she lacked the perspective, the emotional maturity to really see that this was trauma that she went through, that she was trafficked, that she was sexually assaulted, that she was degraded and humiliated. Maybe at the time this all became normal to her because it was happening so often, and maybe only in retrospect could she look back and see that she was traumatized. But I don't think it's a black or white situation. And I do think that in some perverse way, she did love him. She did feel connected to him. And that's what makes this so complicated.
Well, one of the other issues that came up during her cross-examination, and I wonder if it's an issue that's going to be amplified more, surrounds her therapy for possible PTSD. This was something the defense had asked her about. There is a part that concerns how to recall past memories, possibly traumatic memories. It's called apparently neurofeedback therapy. There's, quote, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So Ventura Fine described it as, quote, for instance, you're getting, I don't want to talk too much, if you're getting beat up and couldn't walk out of a room, you get to walk out of the room in that healing. And you wonder if the argument will be she isn't necessarily recalling what actually happened to her, but the memories are tainted. The memories are manufactured. Your thoughts on this? I mean, I feel that's where the defense was going.
I do. But again, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, is a well-known therapy for people with trauma. It works to help desensitize them and reprocess those memories, because trauma disrupts those networks where memories form, and very often those memories can be highly fragmented. So this is a known treatment for people with trauma, and it's actually very successful.
But that's what could lead someone all those years later to look back and say, wait a minute, I was a victim. I realized what happened to me.
Because now they're able to put it in perspective and see it for what it was, whereas at the time they couldn't see that.
Because the one thing I don't quite understand is what would have led her to file the lawsuit in November 2023. What led to that after everything? It wasn't as if, she ended a relationship a month earlier and then filed a lawsuit against him. And I've always said, she settles with him, but then cooperates with the government nonetheless. So sure, the defense will say she had a financial incentive. She was motivated by different factors to go after Sean Combs. But I am curious. I think that actually hurts the defense's argument. I think it helps her credibility. And I mean, that's my perspective from a legal point of view. But let me ask you this. Dr. Bober, this is a tough situation because how does a jury sort this out? What do I mean by that? You can have an alleged victim say, it may look like I was fully on board, but that's not how I was feeling on the inside. Now, putting aside the fact that, a jury might say, how on earth could someone in Casandra Ventura Fine's position consent to everything that she described? Doesn't make sense unless, of course, there was a psychological issue at play. But putting that aside, you wonder, okay, you have an alleged victim testify and say, it may look like I was consenting. It may look like I was on board. It may look like I was a willing participant, but that's not how I was feeling on the inside. That may be true. But from a criminal law point of view, to me, it feels very, very difficult for the jury to convict or not.
So if I'm the prosecution and I have an expert up there, I'm going to say that we play roles in our life every day, right? We go to work and maybe we don't want to be in certain situations, but that's our job. So we play a certain role. And maybe what we project to the world is not how we truly feel, but we do it to cope. We do it to survive. We do it to get through. So I would start with that. And I think this is really going to come down to what we call psychoeducation, meaning we're going to have to really educate the jury in terms of how these psychological phenomena work, and the fact that people may seem like they're willing participants. They may seem like they're going along with it completely, but they're really not, because there is some form of duress, some form of coercion that they're responding to that may be immediately obvious. We don't know the timing of why this lawsuit occurred when it did. Maybe she came to the realization that all those years that she was traumatized, maybe she came to the realization for all those years that she was traumatized, that she was sexually assaulted, and that's why it happened. Or maybe there was some other intervening factor that we're yet unaware of.
Look, we've been talking about it a lot, but I believe that the psychological evidence, the expert testimony is going to be key here. We mentioned Dr. Dawn Hughes, who's going to be testifying for the prosecution, presumably about coping strategies, presumably about why alleged victims do not leave their alleged abusers, although she won't be allowed to testify about coercive control. That was ruled out. You know, there was a whole discussion about why do you have to tell the jury about that? They can use their own common understanding about it. Plus, it might conflict with a legal definition of coercive control. But if we believe that's what Dr. Hughes is going to testify for the prosecution, what is the defense going to do? Well, we believe the defense is going to call their own forensic witness, forensic psychologist Dr. Alexander Barty. So, Dr. Bober, after everything we've just talked about, what do you think the defense's expert is going to say?
I think the defense expert is going to say that at the end of the day, she had free will, that she had autonomy and independence, and that she could have walked away. I think that's what they're going to say. I think they're going to, if they're smart, acknowledge the fact that these phenomena exist, but that in this particular case, this went on for years, and she could have walked away. I think that's what they're going to say.
And maybe strike a little bit at that therapy to recall memories, I would imagine, maybe?
Yep, to try to undermine it, correct.
Battle of the experts, once again. Look, I think that this is a very, very important issue in this case. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. You can make the argument that this case rises and falls based on the testimony of Cassie. So this, to me, feels like a central issue. I'm happy we had a chance to talk a little bit more about it. Again, for anybody who's watching this, and I was putting these questions, I don't want it to make it look like I don't believe Casandra Ventura fine or whatnot. I'm raising the questions that will definitely come up by both the prosecution and the defense. It's something that I think the jury is going to have to wrestle with when they go back to deliberate in, 7 weeks. Dr. Daniel Bober, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.